Captured by Women is brought to you by Nido Fortigro. Your love, their future.
Another week has ended, and we are excited to be coming your way once again with another edition of Captured by Women. My name is Rose Bonaite, and today I'm co-hosting the show with Aisha Yakubu. So on today's show, we are going to be looking at the compelling issues of the week, some of them. And the three most compelling issues that we'll be looking at, one would be the recent visit of the IMF boss to Ghana, and her feedback that the economy was doing well. Well, we will dissect that comment when we have a guest joining us to see whether there is some merits in that comment or not. We will also talk about the president's encounter with the media and the matters arising from them. We would have a guest from GJA and also a journalist from Media General to look at the event and give us their opinions as to how the event went. We'd also look at ex-President Mahama's comment that if he wins power, he will abolish the double-track system. Now, is this a mere propaganda talk or a genuine opportunity for us to really sit down and look at the woes of the double-track system? So these are the issues that are going to engage us on the show. And as always, we are sponsored by GTP and by Nido. Please stay with us as we take these messages.
This is Captured by Women, and we're moving straight to a topic that lots of people have been talking about already. It is the double-track educational system. Now, former President John Dramani Mahama was quoted as saying that when he comes to power, he was going to abolish the system completely. This is because he doesn't see it as feasible. He doesn't know how it's going to work out in the long run, you know. Of course, people have spoken a lot about the double-track system. Parents are worried about how their wards are going to cope. Rosemond is here. Rosemond, what's your take on the double-track system and what John Dramani Mahama said?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think we haven't really had the last of the free SHS policy and, you know, the double-track system and everything therein. I think that when the system was introduced, a lot of people showed or spoke about its merits and its demerits. And when you look at the system, naturally, it is not a perfect system. But when you focus on the overall objective of what the free SHS policy seeks to achieve, I think that, yes, the system has its ills, it has its woes. We know that as a result of the system, there has been congestion. We are told that, you know, a lot of people, there has been a massive enrollment. So there is congestion, there's a stretch of the logistical and infrastructural facilities at the various schools and all that. But I feel that, I mean, when you look at that versus the positives, I mean, prior to the introduction of the free SHS policy, many people were deprived of pursuing secondary education. So it is not a perfect system, but certainly I think it is a step in the right direction. The problems that have come with it are being solved and will continue being solved. So I think that for me, I think that it is giving people a lot of young women and young men who hitherto would never have had the opportunity to attain secondary education, to do so, to empower them. So I think that it is good, but certainly the challenges therein needs to be solved.
The fact that the ex-president is talking about abolishing the system baffles me, considering he wasn't even in favor of the free SHS system in the first place. I was thinking he was going to say
it was progressive.
Yes, you know, it's quite difficult, especially for the students as well. Imagine another government coming in power and then saying that, you know what, we are changing the entire thing. You know, we keep changing the system for the kids. It's confusing. The parents are supposed to adjust. You know, it's not an easy thing. Our educational system has been on and off for a few times, and those people that suffer the most are the students.
Definitely, the students, and then the guardians and the parents.
Even teachers as well.
Exactly. So all the stakeholders in the education sector are affected. And I know that with this statement, a lot of people are already worried because, as you said, it's almost like we are always in a swinging pendulum when it comes to our educational system. So when people are wondering what is going to happen, and indeed, if he wins, that is if he wins, what is going to happen? So there's a lot of doubts, a lot of concerns that have been thrown up. But another person would also say that, you know, once this conversation about the double track system never goes away, probably it's really about time that government, you know, settles the matter, or is probably more proactive in communicating the achievements or the milestones they're chalking with resolving the challenges. Because, you know, otherwise, definitely people have questions, people are not sure of what is happening. I know that parents, even when the track system was introduced and people with the gold track, the green track, there were lots of questions. And there were issues about even consultation. You know,
the parents did not know how it was going to pan out.
You know, parents were not involved, the stakeholders, some of the teachers, you know, said that they were not involved. So there was a lot of confusion, and the general feel was that there wasn't enough stakeholder engagement before the policy was introduced. But now it's here, and we are running with it. So I feel that probably as and when we talk major achievements, or maybe the government is putting it out, but not putting it out hard enough for people to know that indeed the challenges are being addressed. We know that NAT, for example, has come out to say that the focus shouldn't the focus rather should be on expanding the infrastructural facilities at the schools. Parents have also come to say that with the double track system, now the children will be home. And that has an impact on their pocket. Why?
Of course.
Vacation classes.
Yes, they need to pay for that as well.
They need to pay for that as well. So there's a lot of conversations going on that I feel that government should come out and address the challenges and speak to the public to assure them in terms of what interventions they are putting in to resolve all the challenges that are coming up.
What I think is that the government should put more effort in expanding infrastructure, making room for all the numbers that are to come in.
Certainly, certainly.
In order to get all of the students in the school. And that's how we wrap up Spin right here. We'll be back with more.
Thanks for staying with us. So the IMF boss, Ms. Christine Lagarde, visited Ghana recently and said that our economy is performing well. Many people have expressed their opinions about it, but we've decided to bring an expert in the person of Mr. George Domfe. He is a development economist and a senior fellow at the Center for Social Policy Studies at the University of Ghana to get his perspectives on the comment by the IMF boss. Doc, you're welcome to Captured by Women.
Thank you.
All right. So, Doc, we would like to first of all start by asking that, do you think that her comment is really a true reflection of our economy? We know that typically when the IMF visits a country, they make statements on how the economy is faring. So should we take this seriously?
Yes, I will just say one word and say yes. Yeah, every economy, if you really want to know whether it is doing well or not doing well, we have what we call macroeconomic indicators.
Okay.
These are the indicators that we use to assess the health of an economy. And so for the past few months or few years, we have seen almost all the indicators showing positive signs of recovery.
Okay.
And so I agree with her that our economy, the macroeconomy, is doing very well. Yeah.
But Doc, we know that our facility with the IMF is coming to an end. And if I can piggyback on the happenings of the media, president's encounter with the media, where I think someone asked a question about the economy and alluded to the fact that, yes, it's all, the numbers look good, but people are actually not feeling it in their pocket. So how do we correlate that to you saying that the macroeconomic indicators are fine, but people can't feel that in their pocket?
Thank you very much. I think that is a very intelligent and very important question that we've all been trying to find answers to. Yes, some of when we talk about the macroeconomic indicators, some of them, the moment you say it is doing very well, it tends to affect everybody. But some of them, no, it will depend on where you work. For example, the growth. We all know Ghana recorded the highest growth rate of 14.9 in 2011 when we discovered oil in commercial quantity. And since then, the growth took a nosedive trend. It was growing positively, but at a declining rate. And so from 14.9% in 2011, by 2016, we had recorded the lowest growth rate in over 20 years in the region of 3.6. That was not good enough. And so when the following year, 2017, we went over 8%, then, you know, it was to say that for the first time in about 5 years, what would have been a declining trend of the growth rate, rather, you know, I mean, change, and we started witnessing an increasing, you know, growth, which was very positive. But the moment you see the economy, or you hear the economy is growing at 8%, and so what? You really must go to the details to find out which sector of the economy is growing. And 2017, it was the oil sector that did so well. And so what that meant was that if, for example, I'm engaged in the agricultural sector, and that sector is not doing very well, and oil sector is doing very well, and you say the economy, the entire economy is doing well, in a way, it is not affecting me. And rightly so, our economy, if you look at the sector, we have 3 sectors. We have what we call primary sector, we have the secondary sector, and we have the tertiary sector. Over the years, the tertiary sector has been doing very well. But we all know that to go to school, and I always say this, to go to tertiary, you must move from primary to secondary. And some time ago, the primary sector, that's the agricultural sector, was doing very well. And we were all expecting that it will link up with the secondary sector, that is the industrial sector. And afterwards, we then moved to tertiary. We never saw this. We moved directly from primary to tertiary. That was somewhere around 2006. And so now, tertiary is doing very well. And when we talk about tertiary, we're talking about education, health, tourism, telecommunication, and all these are, you know, subsectors are doing very well. And so if these sectors are the reason why we are growing, and if you come to know that over 40% of the labor force is engaged in agriculture, and agriculture is not doing so well, then this so-called growth is not what Ghanaians need. And so sometimes we say that our growth has not been proper. I'm talking about years back, but talking about this particular year, we've seen some changes. The agricultural sector has picked up. It did so well, and that's what we want to say. Manufacturing sector has also been doing well, at least for only this year. It's been doing well. For some time past, it was recording negative growth. And now we have seen the manufacturing sector also showing positive signs of growth. And so when we say the economy is growing, it doesn't mean everybody's business is supposed to do well. It depends on where you are. And so if where I am, the growth is even negative and the entire economy is growing positively, you can't say that, you know, that will affect me.
Doug, on the overall, how do you think the Ghana's partnership with the IMF has impacted the country's economic growth?
Yeah, it has. It has done a lot, and that leaves me thinking whether we are ready to be economically independent. I go back to 1960s when we subscribed to the ERP, Economic Recovery Program, and at the time the economy was doing very bad. But after 1984, 85, 86, Ghanaian economy, we did so well with the Economic Recovery Program and Structural Adjustment Program. Then after that, the economy went back to where it was. We were not doing well until the year 2002. We went back to GPRS, another, you know, conditionality, and another program from the West, and we did so well with it. And if you look back to our economic history, you realize that from 2003 through to 2006, 2007, the economy was doing so well. Then after we went out of that program, we went back to where we were. And when, precisely 3rd April 2015, we went for extended credit facility. And I tell you, part of what we are seeing today is because of that particular program. Significantly, if I want to look at it, then I will want to look at the fiscal stabilization. Fiscal stabilization was an issue. When we talk about fiscal deficit or fiscal problem, it is always the difference between government expenditure and revenue. And so, if you are able to, for example, collect 100 cedis as your revenue, and you spend 80 cedis, then you have what we call surplus, budget surplus of 20 cedis. And if your GDP, for example, is 100 cedis, then we say that you are surplus as a proportion to GDP is 20%. Now, if it doesn't happen that way, but you are able to generate 100 cedis, 80 cedis, and you spend 100 cedis, then you leave what we call fiscal deficit of what? 20%. IMF, in trying to control economies of the world, has a minimum threshold. Let me say a maximum threshold, as for that matter. A maximum threshold of 20%. In the moment the fiscal deficit as proportion to GDP hits 20%, then it means that your economy is in fiscal distress or fiscal crisis. And we don't want to get there. Greece went there, and we all have learned what has happened to that particular economy. Fortunately for us as a country, we haven't gone there before, but we were almost getting closer. 2015, fiscal deficit was 9.5%. It was really high. It was really on the higher side. Now, we went for this program. And one of the key things they wanted us to do is to ensure fiscal stabilization. In other words, they wanted us to reduce our expenditure and also increase revenue.
Have we achieved that?
Generation, yes, we have. And so this year's budget is telling us that fiscal deficit at the end of the year, they are targeting 4.5. Indeed, if you look at when the budget was read and we had the data up to September, they had recorded about 4.7. That means that they are almost getting the target. And so if you have dropped all the way from 9.3 to 4.7, it means that you are doing very well.
But Doug, let me come in at this point, because after Ms. Lagarde gave the feedback, she was also honest about the challenges that we're still facing. A large debt stock, a low revenue base, fragilities in the financial sector. So we're not definitely out of the woods yet. So if you juxtapose that against your comment that there's been some improvements in the fiscal deficits, what does that mean? What is the outlook? Is it positive?
Okay, so why the drop in the fiscal deficit, why I'm so excited about it is that the moment your fiscal deficit is so high and you are entering into the new year, it must be balanced. Okay. So if you look back to our history, Treasury bill, for example, was so high. At that time, government needs money to balance the budget, and they will go all out to get it from wherever they would. And one of the trusted means have been Treasury bill. Anytime I go to bank to buy Treasury bill, I'm giving money to government.
Okay.
And so these small monies, instead of going to the private sector, goes to the government, and that is what we call crowding out effect. Okay. The moment Treasury bill rate goes up, people don't use their monies on any productive thing. They rather would save because at the end of the day, they are going to make so much money. Now, if your fiscal deficit is very small and it is manageable, you don't want to increase Treasury bill rate to get what would have gone to the private sector. And in a way, the private sector gets more access to loan. And what are they going to use it for? To increase production. And once that happens, it is the general economy that will see positive signs of growth. And so that is where I look at it and I say good. But let me say, when we say the economy the macroeconomy is doing well, we are speaking in relative terms. We are trying to compare it to 2015 when we went for the extended credit facility. For example, I'm saying that 2015 when we went for it, fiscal deficit was over 9%. Now it has dropped below 5%. And so that is positive. Okay. And that is not to say that we have achieved what we want. Because as we speak, lending rate hovers around 30%, and that is too high. Around 2015, it was about 44%. What that means clearly is that if at that time I had gone to bank to take 100 million Ghana cedis, at the end of the year, I'm going to give away as much as 40 million to the banks. And assuming I have gone for this and I want to use it to set up business, and then at the end of the year, you are giving so much 44 million to the bank out of the 100 million that you want for. In the next 2 years, how much do you have? You've almost given out everything to the banks. And if care is not taken, I've always been saying this, you go to Sawam. And so you see, it was killing people's initiative of going for loan to start something. That was very bad. Today it has dropped because the policy rate has dropped all the way from 25.5% to 17%, and because of that it has dragged along the lending rate. And so if you still have lending rate around 30%, even though in relative term they have been declined, and so you say it is good, it is still so high. US, as we speak, lending rate hovers around 4%. And so if I were in US and I've gone for $100 million as loan, for the first year the banks will get 4 million. I'll still have 96 million to work with. And in the next 10 years, even if my business is not doing well, I'll still have so much to work with. And so if after 15 years is when the business will start bringing in money, I would have had a lot to move the business forward. Okay. And so that's what we are saying. And so if you still have your lending rate hovering around 30%, it's bad. It's not something that can take us to where we want to. But the fact remains that there has been a drop, and that's what I'm talking about.
Doc, Ghana's relationship with the IMF has been likened to the servant and master kind of relationship. It's like they basically tell us what to do, regardless of the impact it has on the people in the country. What's your take on that?
You are perfectly right. And so sometimes I do want to say that we are not an independent country, even though we spend monies to celebrate the 6th March. If I have all the powers, I would say that let's stop that celebration, because we are still under them. They tell us what to do, and if you look back to history, as I'm saying, under ERP, we did so well when we were controlled. When President Kufuor came, GPRS 1, GPRS 2, we did so well. The recent President Mohammed's extended credit facility, with signs are showing that we are doing well. So we tend to do well under control. And so some have said that when they come to control us, they tell us what to do, and what they tell us to do may not be what we need. And so, in effect, we don't need them. But I also ask this question. As much as I agree with that proposition, I also ask this question. Do we get it right when we are not being controlled? That is the question.
So, Doc, tying into that and in trying to wrap up our conversation, now that the IMF program will be ending soon, do you have confidence that we will be able to do this on our own? What is the outlook for our economy?
There was one thing that came out from this year's budget, and the president recently repeated it, that the fiscal deficit, they are going to make sure it doesn't go beyond 5%. And so they are seeking to get legal backing to that effect. Yes, and so if that works, then thank God. It is going to cut reckless expenditure. And so that to me will be how we will take our own destiny
into our own hands.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. George Domfe, who is a development economist and a senior research fellow at the Center for Social Policy Studies at the University of Ghana. So, in wrapping up, he is basically saying that yes, it looks good. I mean, we can say that Ms. Lagarde's assessment of the economy is fair, but there's still more work that needs to be done. We'll wrap it up here on Big Bang One. Stay with us. We'll be back after these messages.
We have excerpts of the presidential meet the press with President Nana Akufo-Addo and the media personnel that went there to ask questions of the happenings throughout the year. So let's watch and then we'll be back for more.
The first tranche of this facility will be used to build more classroom blocks and dormitories in our schools, to give our schools appropriate facilities to meet the demands of the 21st century. And so we are on double track. And we're building the classrooms and laboratories and gradually turning the once deprived schools into well-equipped ones.
Welcome back to Captured by Women. We're moving on to the next topic of the day. And on Wednesday, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, he had his second press encounter with some media personnel. And of course, there were some controversies surrounding it. First of all, the show did not start on time. And also, some journalists did not have the opportunity to ask the questions that they wanted to. So we've been joined by Mr. Kofi Yeboah. He's the secretary of the Ghana Journalists Association, and also Winston Amoah. He is the host of 3FM's morning show. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
I'll start with you, Winston. You were there early. What's your general assessment of the entire event?
Well, I think it could have been better. The invitation from the Ghana Journalists Association, who were the organizers, said we're supposed to be there at 4 p.m. I realized that some of the flyers that came out said it was going to start at 5 p.m. That notwithstanding, I got there some few minutes to 4 because, you know, the president during his inaugural speech and during his earlier statements had made it very clear that he was going to adhere strictly to time. And so I was hopeful that it was going to start on time. It didn't start on time. The president got in somewhere around 5:20 something. And once the president got in, went straight into giving us a mini State of the Nation address. And after speaking for about 40 minutes, around 6, 7, you know, the floor was open for questions. And even, the information minister said, well, Mr. President, we have, and this is something people saw, we have about 70 questions. He says, what? No, I mean, that's going to take like 4 hours. I can't do that. We're closing at 7. Information minister says, oh, we'll do it within 1. I says, no, it has to be at 7.
Wow.
Yes, and so there are many journalists who wanted to ask questions, and unfortunately they couldn't ask questions. For me, the challenge was this. See, you get into a program, the Ghana Journalists Association, and the guidelines they give, Kofi Yeboah is here. And I felt, I mean, when you have journalists sometimes trying to restrict journalists, it's unfortunate. Look, you cannot tell me that if I'm going to ask the president a question, I should not give a background or a premise to my question. Kofi Yeboah is a senior, that is my senior in journalism, and he knows that's something that is not done. Unfortunately, those were the guidelines. There were 10 guidelines the GJA president, our owner Phil Money, gave us, and it was part of it. Can you imagine? You know, that notwithstanding, well, journalists were prepared, of course. I mean, those were guidelines. People were prepared to go ahead because you just can't, when you have the president in front of you, you must remind the president of things he said before you go ahead with your question. And you saw the answers of the president. There were times he was asking for further information. The problem for me was that, look, when you have such a thing, you ask journalists to choose sectors, areas. Did the GJA know, for instance, that the president was going to give a State of the Nation address before asking for questions? Because if the president was going to do so, there was no need to tell us to choose areas. Because the moment you do so, once the president is done, he might say something that you would want to follow up on. What happens to the areas that you've chosen? I know Kofi Yeboah would tell you that, oh, but somebody came in and said, I have changed my area. Unfortunately for him, he got a chance to be called because of the area he had chosen initially. There were others who chose the economy, and mind you, 6 persons were called to ask questions on the economy. One went and asked a question about sports. Ebo Kwanza.
So, Mr. Yeboah, what's your take? I mean, Winston has outlined some challenges and some concerns. What is your response to that?
Okay, I thank you very much. First and foremost, let me issue a disclaimer.
Okay.
I'm not here to speak for the government of the day.
Okay.
I'm here to speak for the GJA.
All right. Because
in as much as we had collaborated, it is not everything that we can speak to. I must also put on record that, as far as I know, this is the first time the press had been organized that the GJA had been involved. So to that extent, I think it was a laudable thing to do. Now, we had agreed on a number of things, and let me start with the ground rules. I guess they are acceptable norms. When we are doing interviewing, there are ground rules. For example, it is ethical for a journalist, when you are going to do interview, you identify yourself. You identify. Identification is by indicating your name, your media organization, and the reason for which you want to conduct the interview. It is even the reason why if you want to bring somebody to studio, you may even want to give the person a synopsis, just to give the person a fair idea about the area. So those are acceptable things. Now, some of the ground rules say put your phone on silence. I think it is fair. When I was entering the studio, I had to put my phone on silence. I think it is fair. And then also, no preambles to questions. I think it is also fair, especially when we are all talking about the need to have many journalists ask questions. So if one person is going to spend 2-3 minutes on a preamble, you are not going to be fair to others who also had questions to ask. And I must emphasize that the first person who asked a question, Edward Nyakun of GTV, I think his question was about 20 seconds. So if you frame your question well, and we didn't just say no preambles, but we said between 30 seconds and 1 minute.
No, but Mr. Ebo, you just said we shouldn't give preambles.
I think 1 minute is enough time to ask a question, in my view. And then we also said that one question, one journalist, one question. I think that one too is fair, because if one person goes and stand there to ask 3 questions, you are not going to be fair to others. Now, on the issue of journalists writing their names and the sectors which they want to ask questions on, what informed that format is that in the past we had situations where questions had been skewed to very few sectors, normally economy and politics. Okay. So we were thinking that this time around, let's have a system that will allow for a very good spread of the questions. So we identified about 13 sectors. And so what we were going to do is that we were going to spread the questions over those 13 sectors. Now, the Minister of Information, who was the moderator of the event, would then select. That is random. That has always been the case. In the past, what was happening was that you raise your hand and the moderator will identify you. That is also random. I don't think there's a difference between that and putting your name down on paper and somebody picking your name. If you,
but Mr. Ebo, let me come in at this point. You know, following the event, there's been a lot of conversation going on.
Yeah.
And one of the comments has been that the event was designed, or the format was designed somewhat to prevent journalists from asking the president tough questions. Is that true?
No, in my view, it is not true. I don't know whether there's any example to that effect, because in my view, I don't see how that could be true when the president could not answer many of the questions. He had to call on his ministers to come and ask them. So if anybody is saying it was designed not to ask President tough questions, I disagree, because the evidence doesn't speak to that fact.
Well, you see,
I can see that you're itching to say something.
No, you see, this is where the challenge is. I have seen Meet the Press in some instances here in this country where there's a queue, and so you join. You're a senior, so you've seen in, for instance, the case of Atamas, there's some people just would have to join. So they get into the queue and go ahead to ask their question. A bit about, random. I mean, That's neither here nor there, because random is a probability sample. Everybody stands a chance. This is somebody holding a paper and decides who gets to ask a question. I mean, this is purposive. I look at it and I say, I'm calling this person, I'm calling that person. I do not have a problem with that. You see, what you have done, naturally, somebody will say, oh, that shouldn't create a problem. But you've created a problem now because, look, people get in there, they do not have a chance to ask questions. As journalists, we come out and the public is bashing the journalists and say, you went and did not ask good questions. So the journalists say, well, but I was going to ask a question. I did not get a chance to ask a question. Mr. Yeboah, the point simply is this. The Ghana Journalists Association, together with the Ministry of Information and the presidency, should have realized that the moment you invite journalists to come and ask the president questions, you give them time to ask questions. Not everybody can ask questions. Agree. Not all the 70 journalists who wrote their names can ask questions. But in the past, what we had seen is that as on TV, people are lifting their hands, they've raised their hands. And so at least whoever is moderating knows that, oh, at least these people have raised their hands. You could go round, for instance, and do by media houses. That's also been done. You could call that, some bit of deciding to give, so every media house will get a chance. We got a chance, granted. Other media houses did not get a chance at all. So if you invite a group of journalists from a media house, go there, and they all, some want to ask questions. None of them gets a chance to ask a question. Certainly, that is not the best. We have seen it before here. Mustafa Hamid did it. What he did was that he tried as much as possible to get every media house, at least one or two from that house. Did you hear anything, for instance, from the previous encounter with the press, when the president met the press? Did you hear anybody saying that journalists were not given a chance to ask questions? You didn't hear that the last time. Mr. Yeboah, did you hear that? You didn't. No, did you hear that the last time? You didn't hear that the last time because what happened was that for some reasons, at least from every conglomerate, if we do a lot of groups.
Yes.
Dr. Mustafa Hamid tried as much as possible to pick somebody. Oh, you come, ask your question. You come, ask your question. In this case, there were instances where some media, and I'm not going to mention, we were fortunate. Michael Oteje got to ask a very good question. And so, but there are other groups that didn't have anybody to ask a question. My challenge is that the GGA could have seen this coming. Because if you say the president should come and, give a State of the Nation address, what the president was like a State of the Nation address, telling us what he's done all over the years. And these are things, but also on a bit about the questions that we're asking. Mr. Yeboah, you know what they call impact and the weight things carry. You know of currency. You're a senior man at that. Today, the issues facing the country are not the one stadium, one district project. What is the issue facing, or what are the issues facing Ghanaians now? Ghanaians are talking about the Oslo Chancery. Ghanaians are talking about the drones. Ghanaians are talking about times being hard. The president himself admits that times are hard. Ghanaians are talking about the right to information and when Parliament is going to pass these things. There are a lot of issues on the economy. There are other issues in other sectors. All these things were going to turn out. So to be very honest with you, when you say that in many of the instances people do not ask questions in other sectors, people do, except that, for instance, so somebody goes and they say, oh, nobody asked a question about the creative arts. Well, there was a question about the creative arts, but that question about the creative arts, how many people will that benefit throughout the country? Because it was in relation to a theater in one place.
Mr.
So that's the whole thing.
I bet you have a reaction to all that Christine has said.
Not to react to all that he has said. Last year there were issues, and let me make this point. We did not ask the president to come and deliver a State of the Nation address. And personally, I would have loved it if the president had come and said, "Official part to us all. We've come a long way, and we are hoping and believing that next year will be a better year." Now I open the floor. That wouldn't have taken about five minutes. And then the extra time he used to read that speech could have been used to allow other people to ask more questions. That didn't happen. And from my observation of things, I want to believe that there were even things that the Honorable Minister himself may not have had under wraps. And so when the Honorable Minister started, you recall that he called 6 journalists to ask questions on the economy. That was the kind of format we were going to run. So after that, we were going to move to another sector. Then the President said, no, we can't be here for all the time. So quickly, the Honorable Minister himself then had to revise the arrangement. So the next batch, he called one from sports, one from this sector, one from this sector, just to allow for that spread. So I think the format was, as I said, based on the past. In the past, last year, people had issues that we didn't touch on many sectors. So we were trying to move away from that past to and yesterday I don't think anybody was you had more than 2 journalists being called from one media house. I don't think so.
Let me ask this final one. Do you think that the President will be able to see through his promise of meeting the press twice a year due to what happened on Wednesday at the banquet hall of the Jubilee House?
Well, he promised and he was able to do it. So I have no cause to doubt that. Some suggestions have come up that if he would uphold that promise, then perhaps we may also want to think about having one in the southern sector and the second one in the northern sector. So it will allow journalists from the northern sector to also have time to engage with him. Those are the kinds of things that we can be thinking about.
Aisha, I want to ask Mr. Yeboah. You see, the journalist is always a journalist. Mr. Yeboah, are you saying that the plan was changed by the President, and so the President actually was the one who thwarted the plan of the whole program?
No, I have not said so.
You said, you had a plan, and then the President, that's how you're going to go by it, and the President said he didn't have time. So, in effect, the President was the one who changed the plan.
No, I am saying that if you looked at the way the Honorable Minister
but for the President's insistence,
for the President's insistence on time. I wouldn't use the word insistence. When the President intervened.
But that's the fact. But for the President's insistence on time, wouldn't have got. But finally, I just want to get, finally, Mr. Yeboah. So isn't it surprising then that the President says he didn't have a lot of time, and after that he stayed around to have some chit-chatting for about 30-45 minutes with journalists? Maybe you should have given that to journalists to ask questions.
Who am I to question the President on that? But for me, I think I prefer to look at the water as half full rather than half empty. Okay. It is better than not having the opportunity at all. What do we do with the opportunity we are given, however limited it is? That for me is a bigger issue we need to address.
Thank you so much. Weising Amoah is the host of 3FM's morning show, and Mr. Kofi Yeboah is the General Secretary of the Ghana Journalists Association. We'll be right back after this.
Well, it's time for us to wrap up the show for today. It's really been an exciting conversation where we got guests in to share their perspectives on the compelling issues of the week. So in wrapping up the show, we first of all talked about ex-President Mahama's assertion that if he indeed wins power, he would abolish the double-track system. We took a spin on that and looked at the positives and the negatives of the double-track system. We also talked about the IMF boss's assertion that the Ghanaian economy was doing well. We had Dr. George Domfe from the University of Ghana join us to bring his perspectives on the matter. We also talked about the president's encounter with the media. Certainly, there were mixed reactions. The GJ expressed their concern that the timing was short. We had a journalist for Media General also joining to share the perspectives of the journalists on how things could have been done better. As always, the show has been sponsored by GTP and by NIDO, and I did this today with Aisha Yakubu. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Bye.
Been going way out of my way. I ain't doing it no more. Way too much attention to what you say. I ain't doing it no more. 'Cause when they talking, they be talking about that shit that they don't know about. Yeah, I hear but the words go in and out. 'Cause I've been going way out of my way.
Captured by Women is brought to you by Nido Fortigro. Your love, their future.